Let me tell you about a man named David. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a superhero. He was just a regular guy, like you or me. David had what everyone called the perfect life. He had a good job in the city, one that paid the bills, and even left a little extra for vacations. He lived in a nice house in the suburbs. It had a green lawn. It had a white picket fence. Yes, an actual white picket fence. It was the kind of house you see in movies, the kind that whispers happily ever after. It was his home, a place filled with laughter and the smell of Sunday morning pancakes. He thought this life was solid. He believed it was built on a foundation of love and trust, something that could weather any storm. His world revolved around his family. He was a husband. He was a father to 2 wonderful kids. Every evening, he would come home from work, and his children would run to the door to greet him. Their small arms wrapped around his legs were the best part of his day. He coached his son's soccer team on Saturdays. He helped his daughter with her homework on weeknights. He and his wife were a team, or so he thought. They hosted barbecues in the summer. They hosted holiday parties in the winter. Their friends would always say, "You guys have it all." And David believed them. He felt grateful. He felt lucky. He had worked hard to build this life, brick by brick. This was his reality for 15 years. 15 years of shared memories. 15 years of inside jokes. 15 years of quiet moments. He remembered the day they brought each of their children home from the hospital. He remembered the family trips to the beach, building sandcastles until the sun went down. These memories were not just pictures in an album, they were the very fabric of his existence. He saw his future mapped out clearly. He would watch his kids grow up. He would watch them go to college. He would watch them maybe get married themselves. He would grow old with his wife in that same house with the white picket fence. It was a simple dream, but it was his dream, and it was beautiful. Life felt predictable, in the best way possible. It was a comfortable rhythm of work. It was a comfortable rhythm of family. It was a comfortable rhythm of community. He never questioned it. Why would he? Everything seemed to be exactly where it should be. He was a man who had followed all the rules and done all the right things. He believed in commitment. He believed in promises. He believed in the strength of family. He thought he had secured his own little piece of happiness in a chaotic world. He was content. He was secure and completely unprepared for the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. He had no idea that the foundation he stood on was about to crumble into dust. The end didn't come with a loud bang. It started with a quiet whisper. It began with conversations that felt a little colder than before. It was the silences that grew longer and more uncomfortable at the dinner table. David noticed the small changes, but he pushed them aside. He told himself that all couples go through rough patches. It's normal, he thought. We'll get through this. He tried to talk about it, to fix whatever was broken, but it was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. The connection that once felt so strong was now frayed and weak. The home that was once his sanctuary started to feel like a house of strangers. Then, one Tuesday evening, the whisper became a shout, "I want a divorce." They hung in the air heavy and sharp, shattering the calm of their suburban life. David felt the floor drop out from under him. It was a single sentence, powerful enough to demolish 15 years of history. He was completely blindsided. He couldn't process it. Divorce happened to other people, to the couples they heard about from friends. It wasn't supposed to happen to them. They were the perfect couple. They had the house. They had the kids. They had the whole dream. How could this be happening? The man who had everything faced losing it all. The divorce was not amicable. It was a battle. Lawyers got involved. The process turned ugly, fast. Conversations that were once about love and future plans became about assets and custody. His home became a battlefield of whispered arguments and tense negotiations. The person he'd shared his life with was now an opponent across a legal table. Every interaction brimmed with tension and mistrust. Love and warmth were replaced by bitterness and anger. He felt like a spectator watching his life fall apart in slow motion. The dream was over. The picture-perfect life was a fragile illusion. The white picket fence felt like a cruel joke. He had to face a new, terrifying reality. He was about to lose his wife. He was about to lose his home. He was about to lose time with his children. The future he'd planned was erased. In its place, a blank page, a terrifying void of uncertainty. The man who seemed to have it all was about to find out what it felt like to have nothing. His journey was just beginning. Survival through the wreckage. After the final papers were signed, a profound silence fell over David's world. This wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a loud, deafening emptiness. He found himself in a small, rented apartment on the other side of town. The walls were bare. The furniture was unfamiliar. It smelled of someone else's life, not his. He would walk in after work, and the quiet would hit him like a physical force. There were no kids running to the door. There was no one asking about his day. The house he left behind was filled with 15 years of noise. Laughter, arguments, cartoons on a Saturday morning. This new place just had an echo. His own footsteps were the only sound, a lonely rhythm marking the passing of empty hours. He tried to fill the silence. He would turn on the television, not to watch anything, but just to have voices in the room. He'd leave the radio on all day, a constant stream of music and talk that did little to drown out the loneliness. The evenings were the hardest. This was the time that used to be a chaotic ballet of dinner, homework, bedtime stories. Now it was just him and a microwave meal for one. He'd eat standing up in the kitchen, staring at the blank wall, the taste of the food as bland as his new existence. The silence was a constant reminder of everything he had lost, of the vibrant life that was now just a memory. Sleep offered no escape. He would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last few months. He dissected conversations, searching for the exact point where everything went wrong. Could he have said something different? Could he have done more? These questions haunted him, circling in his mind like vultures. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and filled with anxious dreams. He would wake up in the dark, his heart pounding, momentarily forgetting where he was. Then the reality would crash down on him again. He was alone in this strange apartment, and the life he knew was gone forever. The weekends became vast deserts of time he had to cross alone. Saturdays, once filled with soccer games and family outings, were now long stretches of nothing. He had custody of his kids every other weekend, and those days were a lifeline. But when they left on Sunday evening, the silence that returned was even more brutal. It was amplified by their absence, by the lingering scent of his daughter's shampoo, or the sight of his son's forgotten toy. The apartment felt twice as empty. He was a father, a husband, a family man. Now, in the quiet of his new reality, he felt like none of those things. He was just a man in an empty room, listening to the echo of a life that was no longer his. The emotional toll of the divorce began to show on David physically. He looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the man staring back at him. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under his eyes. His face seemed thinner, his skin pale. He had lost weight without trying, his appetite disappearing along with his happiness. His clothes, from his old life, hung loosely on his frame. He looked like a ghost of his former self, a faded photograph of the happy, confident man he used to be. The reflection was a constant, painful reminder of his new, diminished state. It was the face of defeat. His daily routines, once structured and purposeful, fell apart. Getting out of bed felt like a monumental effort. He'd hit the snooze button again and again, delaying the moment he had to face another empty day. Shaving became a chore he often skipped. Choosing what to wear was meaningless when he felt invisible to the world. He would show up to work looking disheveled, a stark contrast to the sharp, put-together professional he had always been. His colleagues noticed, of course. They would ask if he was okay, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and discomfort. He would just nod and say he was fine, because the truth was too heavy to share. "David, I'm fine." His self-esteem, once a solid foundation, had crumbled into dust. He felt like a failure. In his mind, he had failed at the most important job he ever had, being a husband and keeping his family together. The word divorced felt like a brand on his forehead, a public declaration of his inadequacy. He would walk through a grocery store and feel like everyone was staring at him, judging him. He saw happy couples holding hands and felt a sharp pang of envy and shame. Why couldn't that be him? What was so wrong with him that his own wife didn't want him anymore? These thoughts were toxic, poisoning his perception of himself. This loss of self-worth seeped into every corner of his life. He started doubting his abilities at work, second-guessing his decisions. He felt clumsy and awkward in social situations, convinced he had nothing interesting to say. The confident man who once hosted lively barbecue parties was gone. In his place was a man who felt small, broken, and deeply ashamed. He was no longer David, the successful family man. He was just David, the divorced guy. The stranger in the mirror was a constant, cruel confirmation of his fall from grace, a daily encounter with the man he never wanted to become. David was drowning in grief, but it was a strange kind of grief. No one had died, yet he felt like he was mourning a death. He was mourning the death of his marriage, the death of the future he had planned, the death of the person he used to be. It was a complicated and messy sorrow, one society doesn't always make space for. People send flowers for a funeral, they bring casseroles. But for a divorce, most people just don't know what to say. So they say nothing. David was left to carry the immense weight of his grief alone in the crushing silence of his new life. The grief came in waves, unpredictable and powerful. One moment, numb emptiness. He went through the motions like an automaton. The next moment, a wave of intense anger. Angry at his ex-wife, angry at the legal system, angry at the friends who disappeared, angry at the universe. The anger burned out, leaving cold ashes of despair. Then the sadness, a bone-aching sorrow that made it hard to breathe. A song on the radio they once loved. The sight of a family playing in the park. The smell of freshly cut grass. The lawn he used to mow. Each trigger a tiny pinprick, releasing a fresh flood of pain. Crying in his car during lunch, standing in the shower long after the water ran cold. This wasn't linear, no clear path from sadness to acceptance. A chaotic storm of emotions. Some days a flicker of hope, a tiny spark. He'd make plans, think about joining a gym, call an old friend. Then, without warning, a wave of grief pulled him back under. He felt trapped in a cycle of pain, haunted by memories and what-ifs, mourning a life so close he could almost touch it, yet irretrievably gone. The weight of it all was crushing. The emotional pain was bad enough, but then came the financial knockout punch. Divorce, it turns out, is expensive. It's not just about feelings, it's about numbers on a spreadsheet, and those numbers were brutal. David, who had always been the provider, suddenly found his financial world turned upside down. The legal fees alone were staggering. Every phone call, every document, every hour spent with a lawyer was another bill he couldn't afford. He watched his savings, the money he had carefully set aside for his family's future, evaporate into thin air. It was like burning cash just to officiate the end of his own life. He had to start from scratch, but he was starting from less than zero. His salary, which once comfortably supported one household, was now stretched thin across two. There was child support. There was alimony. These were not just line items on a budget, they were constant, painful reminders of his new reality. Every paycheck felt like a fraction of what it used to be. He would look at his bank account and feel a wave of panic. He was working just as hard, maybe even harder, but he was falling further and further behind. The financial security he had worked his entire adult life to build was gone. Suddenly, life became a series of difficult financial choices. Could he afford to buy new shoes for work? Or should he make the old ones last another few months? Could he justify buying the brand-name cereal his kids liked? Or would the generic one have to do? These were questions he had never had to ask himself before. He felt a constant, low-grade anxiety about money that hummed beneath the surface of everything he did. He started tracking every single dollar, a prisoner to his own budget. The freedom he once had was a luxury he could no longer afford. The biggest and most painful symbol of his financial collapse was losing the house with the green lawn, the white picket fence. It wasn't just a building made of wood and bricks. It was the container for all his best memories. He remembered carrying his wife over the threshold on their wedding day. He remembered teaching his kids to ride their bikes on that very driveway. And now, as part of the divorce settlement, it had to be sold. The for sale sign hammered into the front lawn felt like a nail in his heart. He had to help pack up 15 years of a shared life. It was a brutal, heartbreaking process. He had to decide what was his, what was hers, what would be thrown away. How do you divide a life? The day he handed over the keys was one of the worst days of his life. He took one last walk through the empty rooms. The walls were bare where family photos used to hang. The floors echoed with the ghosts of laughter and footsteps. He could see the faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking their children's height. He touched the marks one last time. Leaving that house felt like an amputation. He was losing his home, his sanctuary, the physical center of his world. Now, his kids lived in that house with their mother and her new partner. When he would go to pick them up for his weekend, he had to park on the street and wait. He would look at the house, his house, and see another man's car in the driveway. He would see lights on in the living room where he used to watch movies with his family. He was an outsider looking in at his own life. The pain of this was almost unbearable. The house was a constant, towering reminder that he had been replaced. It was no longer his home, just a house where his children lived, a place he was no longer welcome. There comes a moment after the lowest low. It's not a moment of sudden inspiration or a flash of divine insight. It's a moment of complete and total exhaustion. David reached his. He was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of pretending, tired of being sad, tired of being numb. Sitting on his worn-out sofa one Saturday morning, after his kids had just left, the quiet they left behind was unbearable. For the first time, he didn't try to fight the feeling. He just sat there and let the full weight of his despair wash over him. In that moment of pure, unresisted misery, something shifted. It was the quietest surrender.
I need help. He gave up. Not the kind from that dark night in his car. He surrendered to the fact he could not do this alone. He surrendered to the truth his coping wasn't working. He surrendered to the simple, humbling admission, I need help. I need help.
For so long, asking for help felt like weakness. He was a man. He was supposed to be strong, supposed to handle his own problems. But sitting broken and exhausted, he saw the truth. Continuing to suffer in silence was the real weakness. Real strength was admitting vulnerability, reaching out a hand from the bottom of the well. This tiny shift wasn't a solution, but a crack in the wall of his despair, a tiny pinprick of light. He had no grand plan. He didn't suddenly feel better. The pain was still there. The problems were still real. But for the first time, he gave himself permission to not be okay. He was just David, a man who'd lost his way. And finally ready to ask for directions. This surrender was not a defeat. It was the end of Act 3, the moment before the first step toward a new beginning. That moment of surrender on the sofa didn't magically fix anything. David woke up the next morning still feeling the heavy weight of his life. But something was different. The surrender had left a small, quiet space in his mind, a space where a new thought could take root. I need help. He repeated the words to himself. They were still scary. They still felt like an admission of failure. But they also felt like the only path forward. He knew he couldn't stay at the bottom of the well forever. He had to at least try to find a rope. So he picked up his phone. He didn't call a friend. He didn't call a family member. He wanted someone whose job it was to listen to broken people. He Googled therapists near me. He almost closed the browser. It felt too clinical. But then he remembered the crushing silence of his apartment. He remembered the phone call he almost made to his son. That memory pushed him forward. He found a name, a man with a kind-looking face. The description said he specialized in life transitions and grief. David stared at the phone number for a full 10 minutes. It felt like the hardest call he would ever have to make.
He took a deep breath and lifted the phone to his ear. Receptionist, Dr. Miller's office. David almost hung up. His own voice came out as a quiet croak. David! Hi, he said. I'd like to make an appointment.
That was it. Just a few simple words. But they were the heaviest words he had ever spoken. He scheduled an appointment for the following week. When he hung up the phone, he didn't feel cured. He didn't feel happy, but he felt something. He had taken one tiny, concrete step. He had sent a signal out from the bottom of the well. For the first time in a very long time, he had done something other than just surrender to the fall. He had asked for a rope. The week leading up to his first therapy appointment was long and difficult. David knew one appointment wasn't a magic pill. He needed to do something. He remembered reading about a strategy online called the 5-minute rule. The idea was simple. You commit to doing something for just 5 minutes. If after 5 minutes you want to stop, you can. But you have to start for just 5 minutes. It seemed small. It seemed almost stupid. But David decided to try. His apartment was a mess, a physical representation of his mental state. So he applied the rule. Just 5 minutes of washing dishes. He set a timer on his phone and started. But then, something happened. As he scrubbed the plates under the hot water, he started to focus on the simple physical task. By the time the 5-minute timer went off, he had a small stack of clean dishes. And he kept going. Another part of David's 5-minute rule was directed at his physical self. He had seen his reflection and honestly hated the weak, tired man he saw. He needed to reclaim his body, not just his mind. One afternoon, armed with his new rule, he told himself, "Just 5 minutes, just walk on the treadmill. That's it." He got on a treadmill. He started walking and felt clumsy and out of breath, but he kept showing up. Day after day, he went to the gym. It became non-negotiable. He began with the lightest weights, embarrassed by how little he could lift. The first time he tried the bench press, the empty bar felt heavy. The gym was a place where his problems had no power. All you can think about is the bar, your breath, the burn in your muscles. It became a form of meditation. Slowly, things changed. He began to add weight to the barbell. Each increase was a measurable success. He could see himself getting stronger. This progress bled into other areas of life. If he could add weight to the bar, maybe he could handle more of life's weight. He started walking with shoulders a little straighter. He looked less like a ghost, not healed, but feeling his physical strength return. The day of his first therapy appointment arrived. David sat in the waiting room, his leg bouncing nervously. Dr. Miller called his name. David walked into the office and sat in a comfortable armchair.
Dr. Miller, so what brings you here today? The simple question opened a floodgate. David started to talk.
He talked about the divorce. He talked about the apartment. He talked about the money. He talked about the loneliness. He talked about feeling like a failure. He had held these thoughts inside for so long. Saying them out loud made them real and manageable. Dr. Miller just listened. He nodded. He provided a safe space for David to unload the burden he'd carried alone. For the first time, David heard the sound of his own voice telling his truth without pretending. After the session, David walked out into the afternoon sun. He felt lighter. Speaking his pain had taken some of its power away. It became a story, a series of events that had happened to him. Painful, yes, but tellable. If a story can be told, it can be understood. In that small office, by speaking, he began to find his voice again. It was quiet, hoarse from disuse, but it was his. David's routine had become his lifeline. Part of it was a stop at a small independent coffee shop near his apartment, a way to be around people without pressure. One Saturday, he shared a communal table. A woman sat across, smiled, opened her book. She looked up and said, "Sorry, this author is just ridiculous." David smiled back, surprised. "Good ridiculous or bad ridiculous?" he asked. The small question became a bridge. Her name was Sarah. They talked for over an hour. They didn't talk about anything deep. It was a light, easy conversation, the kind he'd not had in years. For the first time, he wasn't the divorced guy. He was just David having coffee. When Sarah left, she smiled. "It was nice talking to you." And that was it. But it lingered with him. A reminder connection was still possible. That small conversation was a turning point. A crack of sunlight in a long, gray winter. For months, he had been saying no to everything. But one Friday, a friend from work, Mark, called and asked if he wanted to join a few guys for a casual poker night. Taking a deep breath, he did something he hadn't done in almost a year. He said, "Yes." That night, he went to the poker game. The guys were happy to see him. They just treated him like one of the guys. He laughed at a few bad jokes. And when he went home that night, the silence in his apartment didn't feel quite so heavy. A few months later, Ben, a younger colleague who'd just gotten engaged, pulled him aside. "I heard you went through a pretty tough divorce. A friend of mine is going through a really bad one right now. I don't know what to do for him." In that moment, David saw a perfect reflection of himself from a year ago. Instead of deflecting, David took a breath and started to talk. He just shared his story. He was simply bearing witness to the experience, for the benefit of someone else who was now walking that same dark road. As he spoke, he felt a profound shift inside him. The story was no longer just a source of his own private pain and shame. It was becoming a tool, a map he could share. He was turning his greatest loss into his most powerful gift. Today, when David looks in the mirror, he no longer sees a stranger. Instead, he sees a survivor. He is leaner and stronger, his posture straight. He sees the lines on his face, not as marks of defeat, but as a map of his journey. Each line tells a story of a strength he never knew he possessed. The reflection is finally his own again, not a perfect man, but a whole one. His life is not a return to the picture-perfect past. It is something new. His apartment is no longer a sterile, empty box. It is a home. His weekends with his children are now rich and full. He is a different kind of father now, more present, more intentional, more grateful for every single moment. The victory for David is not that he got everything back. He didn't. The victory is that he learned to live without it. His victory is in the quiet moments. The genuine hug from his son. David's story did not end with his own recovery. It found its true purpose when he began to share it. He realized his painful journey could be a lighthouse for other men lost in the same storm. Dozens of men from all over the country replied, thanking him for his honesty. They told him his words made them feel less alone, less like failures. He has started a small, informal support group in his town. They talk, they listen, they share. David facilitates as a peer who knows the territory. He has turned his greatest pain into his greatest passion. The scars he carries from his ordeal are no longer things to be hidden. They are what allow him to connect with others, to show them they are not broken, just wounded. David's story is a powerful reminder that the end of one life can be the beginning of another, more meaningful one. He lost everything he thought was important, only to discover a deeper strength and a more profound sense of purpose. He found victory not by erasing his past, but by embracing it and using it to light a path for others. His scars, once a source of shame, now shine, illuminating the way for those who are still lost in the dark, proving that even after the most devastating loss, it is possible to fight back, build a life of hope, resilience, and connection.